Have you ever noticed how two people can start the exact same diet on the same day with the same motivation and somehow end up in completely different places? One person loses weight, feels better, builds discipline. The other slowly gives up, falls back into old habits, and ends up exactly where they started. At first, it looks like a matter of effort. People usually say things like, they just didn't try hard enough. But that explanation is not only shallow, it's also wrong. Because if weight loss were just about trying harder, then everyone who wanted to lose weight would succeed. But they don't. And the reason why goes much deeper than motivation, willpower, or even knowledge about food. It has everything to do with how the human mind works. Here's the truth most people don't realize. Losing weight is not primarily a physical challenge. It's a psychological one. Your habits, your environment, your identity, and even your past experiences are constantly influencing your behavior, often without you noticing. Let's start with something simple. Imagine two people trying to eat healthier. One of them grew up in a household where meals were structured, balanced, and consistent. The other grew up in an environment where food was chaotic, emotional, and often used as comfort. Even if both people now want to change, their starting points are completely different. Research from Stanford University has shown that early life experiences shape long-term behavior patterns, especially when it comes to habits like eating. This means that what feels normal to one person may feel extremely difficult to another. So when someone says, just eat less, they're ignoring years of psychological conditioning. Now let's go deeper. One of the biggest reasons people fail to lose weight is something called identity conflict. This is when your actions are trying to change, but your self-image hasn't caught up yet. For example, someone might say, I want to be healthy, but deep down, they still see themselves as someone who struggles with food, or someone who always fails diets. That internal belief creates friction. And over time, that friction wins. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, explains that lasting change doesn't come from goals, but from identity shifts. In other words, it's not about what you want to achieve. It's about who you believe you are. If your identity doesn't align with your goals, your brain will constantly pull you back to your old patterns. This is why some people seem to naturally stay consistent. It's not that they have more discipline. It's that their identity supports their behavior. They don't think, I'm forcing myself to eat healthy. They think, this is just what I do. On the other hand, people who struggle often feel like they're constantly fighting themselves. Every healthy decision feels like a battle, and no one can fight themselves forever. Another powerful factor is something called delayed gratification. This is your ability to resist short-term pleasure in order to achieve long-term results. And when it comes to weight loss, this is everything. A famous study from Stanford, known as the Marshmallow Experiment, showed that people who were better at delaying gratification tended to have better life outcomes in multiple areas, including health. Now, while that study has been debated and expanded over time, the core idea still holds. The ability to manage impulses plays a huge role in behavior. Think about it. Junk food gives you immediate pleasure. It's fast, easy, and rewarding. Healthy habits, on the other hand, often feel slow and unrewarding at first. You don't see results instantly. You don't feel a dramatic change overnight. So your brain, which is wired for efficiency and survival, starts pushing you toward the easier option. This is not a lack of intelligence, it's biology. Your brain is constantly trying to conserve energy and maximize reward. That's why highly processed foods are so addictive. They trigger dopamine, the chemical associated with pleasure and motivation. Over time, your brain starts associating those foods with comfort, relief, and even happiness. Dr. Robert Lustig, a well-known researcher in endocrinology, has explained how sugar and processed foods can hijack the brain's reward system in a way that's similar to addictive substances. This doesn't mean food is literally a drug, but it does mean your brain can become conditioned to crave it in powerful ways. So when someone tries to just stop eating junk food, they're not just changing a habit, they're breaking a neurological pattern. And that's much harder than people think. Now let's talk about environment, because this is one of the most underestimated factors in weight loss. Imagine trying to stay on a diet while your house is full of snacks, your friends constantly eat out, and your daily routine revolves around convenience. You're not just relying on willpower, you're constantly resisting temptation. Studies have shown that environment often matters more than intention. In fact, research from Duke University suggests that around 40 to 50% of our daily actions are driven by habits, not conscious decisions. That means a huge part of your behavior is automatic. So if your environment supports unhealthy habits, you will naturally follow those habits, even if you don't want to. On the other hand, people who succeed often design their environment in a way that makes good decisions easier. They keep healthy food visible. They reduce access to junk food. They create routines that remove decision-making from the process. It's not about being stronger. It's about being smarter. Another key difference between people who succeed and those who give up is how they deal with failure. Most people think failure is the end of the process. They miss one workout, eat one bad meal, and immediately feel like they've ruined everything. That leads to what psychologists call the "what the hell" effect, where one mistake turns into a full relapse. But people who succeed see failure differently. They expect it. They understand that setbacks are part of the process, not the opposite of it. There's a concept in psychology called self-compassion, studied extensively by Dr. Kristin Neff. Her research shows that people who are more forgiving toward themselves after mistakes are actually more likely to stay consistent in the long run. That might sound counterintuitive. You would think being harder on yourself would push you to improve. But in reality, harsh self-criticism often leads to shame, and shame leads to avoidance. So instead of thinking, "I messed up, I'm a failure," successful people think, "I slipped, but I can get back on track." That small difference in thinking creates a huge difference in results. Now let's connect all of this. When someone struggles to lose weight, it's rarely because they don't know what to do. Most people already know the basics. Eat better, move more, stay consistent. The real problem is that their psychology is working against them. Their identity doesn't match their goals. Their environment encouraged bad habits. Their brain is wired for immediate reward. Their past experiences shaped their behavior. And their response to failure pushes them further away from progress. So when you look at someone who just can't lose weight, you're not looking at laziness. You're looking at a complex system of mental patterns that need to be understood before they can be changed. And on the other side, when you see someone who successfully transforms their body and keeps the results, you're not just seeing physical change. You're seeing a psychological shift. In the next part, we're going to break down exactly what separates those people on a deeper level. Not just what they do differently, but how they think differently, how they structure their lives, and how they reprogram their behavior in a way that actually lasts. If you look closely at people who successfully lose weight and keep it off, you'll start to notice something subtle but powerful. They don't rely on motivation the way most people do. In fact, many of them don't feel motivated most of the time, and yet they still act. This is where a lot of people get it wrong. They wait to feel ready, to feel inspired, to feel that burst of energy that makes everything easier. But motivation is inconsistent by nature. It comes and goes. And if your progress depends on it, your results will always be unstable. What successful people do instead is build systems. They remove the need to constantly decide, negotiate, and convince themselves to act. Their behavior becomes structured, predictable, and automatic. There's a concept in psychology called implementation intentions, studied by Dr. Peter Gollwitzer. His research shows that when people create specific plans like, if situation X happens, I will do Y, their chances of following through increase dramatically. For example, instead of saying, I'll try to eat healthier, a person might decide, if it's lunchtime, I will eat the meal I prepared at home. That level of clarity reduces mental friction. It eliminates the internal debate. And that internal debate is exhausting. Every time you have to decide between a healthy choice and an unhealthy one, you're using mental energy. This is known as decision fatigue. The more decisions you make throughout the day, the weaker your ability to make good ones becomes. This is why people often stick to their diet in the morning but struggle at night. It's not because they suddenly stopped caring. It's because their mental resources are depleted. Research from social psychologist Roy Baumeister has explored how willpower functions like a limited resource. While some aspects of this theory have been debated, the general observation still applies. The more you rely on willpower alone, the more likely you are to fail over time. So instead of depending on willpower, successful people reduce the number of decisions they have to make. They eat similar meals regularly. They schedule their workouts in advance. They create routines that run on autopilot. This might sound boring, but it's incredibly effective. Because consistency is not built on excitement. It's built on repetition. Now let's talk about another critical factor: emotional eating. A lot of people don't eat because they're physically hungry. They eat because they're stressed, bored, anxious, or even tired. Food becomes a way to regulate emotions. And this is not a weakness. It's a learned behavior. From a psychological perspective, eating can act as a coping mechanism. When you eat something pleasurable, your brain releases dopamine, which temporarily improves your mood. Over time, your brain starts associating food with emotional relief. So whenever you feel uncomfortable, your brain suggests the fastest solution it knows: eat something. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that emotional states can significantly influence eating behavior, often leading to increased consumption of high-calorie foods. This is especially true in environments where those foods are easily accessible. Now think about how this plays out in real life. You have a stressful day, you feel overwhelmed. You come home tired, and suddenly the idea of eating something comforting feels almost automatic. Not because you're hungry, but because your brain is trying to solve an emotional problem with a physical action. People who succeed in weight loss don't necessarily have fewer emotions. They just develop different ways of dealing with them. Instead of using food as their primary coping mechanism, they build alternatives. Some go for a walk, some write things down, some simply pause and recognize what they're feeling. This ability to create a gap between emotion and action is extremely powerful. Psychologist Viktor Frankl once wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose. That idea applies directly here. Most people collapse that space. They feel something and they react immediately. But people who develop awareness can expand that space, even slightly. And that small pause can change everything. Now let's explore consistency from another angle, because this is where many people fail without realizing it. They expect linear progress. They think weight loss should look like a straight line going down. But in reality, it's messy. There are fluctuations, plateaus, and periods where nothing seems to happen. When people don't see immediate results, they assume something is wrong. They start doubting the process. And eventually, they quit. But here's the reality. Progress is often invisible in the short term. There's a concept called the plateau effect, where your body temporarily resists change as it adapts to new behaviors. This is a normal physiological response. But psychologically, it feels like failure. And perception matters more than reality. If you believe nothing is working, you'll stop. Even if, biologically, your body is slowly adjusting and moving in the right direction. This is why tracking can be so important. Not obsessively, but strategically. When you track your behavior, not just your results, you shift your focus. Instead of asking, "Did I lose weight today?" you ask, "Did I follow my process today?" That shift is crucial, because results are delayed, but actions are immediate. People who succeed learn to trust the process even when the results are not visible yet. They understand that consistency compounds over time even when it doesn't feel like it. Now let's talk about another hidden factor: social influence. Humans are deeply influenced by the people around them. This is not optional, it's part of how we evolved. If your social circle normalizes unhealthy habits, those habits will feel normal to you. If everyone around you overeats, skips exercise, and treats health casually, it becomes harder to act differently. On the other hand, if you're surrounded by people who value health, discipline, and consistency, those behaviors become easier to adopt. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that obesity can spread through social networks. In other words, your chances of gaining weight can increase based on the behaviors of people around you. That doesn't mean you're doomed by your environment. But it does mean your environment matters more than you think. Successful people are often intentional about this. They don't necessarily cut people off, but they adjust their exposure. They seek out environments, communities, or even content that reinforces the behavior they want to build. Even something as simple as the videos you watch can influence your mindset. If you constantly consume content that promotes discipline, growth, and awareness, your thinking starts to shift. Slowly, but consistently. Now here's something that might surprise you. People who succeed don't always enjoy the process. They just stop expecting it to feel good all the time. This is a big one. A lot of people quit because they believe that if something is right for them, it should feel natural, easy, or even enjoyable. But that's not how behavior change works. In the beginning, it often feels uncomfortable. Not because it's wrong, but because it's new. Your brain prefers familiarity over improvement. So even if your current habits are harmful, they feel safe, and anything new feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's often a sign that something is changing. People who understand this don't interpret discomfort as failure. They interpret it as part of the process, and that changes how they respond. Instead of saying, "This is too hard, I can't do this," they think, "This feels uncomfortable," but that's expected. That small shift in interpretation can be the difference between quitting and continuing. Now let's connect everything again before we move forward. People who struggle are often relying on motivation, reacting to emotions, expecting fast results, and operating in environments that make change harder. People who succeed build systems, manage their environment, understand their emotions, and accept that progress takes time. It's not that one group is stronger than the other. It's that one group is working with their psychology, while the other is unknowingly working against it. And once you start seeing these patterns, you can't unsee them. Because the difference was never just about food. It was about behavior, perception, and the way the mind interprets effort, reward, and change. At this point, you can probably see that weight loss is not really about knowing what to do. It's about becoming the kind of person who can consistently do it, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or slow. And that transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens through a shift in how you think, how you act, and how you respond to yourself. One of the most important shifts is moving from an outcome-focused mindset to a process-focused mindset. Most people start with outcomes. They want to lose a certain number of pounds, reach a certain look, or hit a specific goal. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when the outcome becomes the only source of motivation, because outcomes are delayed. They take time. And during that time, you're left with uncertainty. But processes are immediate. You can follow your process today. You can complete your habits today. You can act today. A study published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine showed that people who focused on behavior-based goals, like exercise 3 times a week, were more likely to stick with their routines than those who focused only on outcome-based goals. This is because behavior is controllable. Results are not always immediately visible. So instead of asking, "How much weight did I lose?" a more effective question is, "Did I follow my system today?" That shift might seem small, but it changes everything. It puts you back in control. Now let's talk about identity again, but from a practical angle. Earlier, we discussed how identity shapes behavior. Now the question is, how do you actually change your identity? The answer is simpler than most people expect, but it requires consistency. You change your identity by collecting evidence. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, you cast a vote for that identity. One healthy meal doesn't transform you. One workout doesn't define you. But repeated actions start to build a pattern. Over time, your brain begins to update its self-image. Instead of thinking, "I'm someone who always fails," you begin to think, "I'm someone who follows through." This is not about pretending. It's about proving it to yourself through action. And here's the key. The actions don't have to be perfect. They just have to be consistent. Small wins matter more than big, unsustainable efforts. There's a concept known as the minimum viable habit, which focuses on making habits so small that they're almost impossible to fail. For example, instead of committing to an intense workout every day, you commit to just showing up, even if it's for a short time. Why does this work? Because it reduces resistance. The hardest part of any habit is starting. Once you start, it becomes easier to continue. And even if you don't do much, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who shows up. Over time, that identity becomes stronger than your old patterns. Now let's address something that quietly destroys progress for many people. All or nothing thinking. This is the belief that if you can't do something perfectly, there's no point in doing it at all. So if someone can't follow their diet 100%, they abandon it completely. If they miss one workout, they skip the rest of the week. If they eat one unhealthy meal, they turn the whole day into a failure. This mindset is incredibly damaging because perfection is not required for progress. Consistency is. Research in cognitive behavioral psychology has shown that black and white thinking is one of the most common cognitive distortions. It simplifies reality in a way that feels logical, but leads to poor decisions. People who succeed learn to operate in the middle. They understand that doing something is always better than doing nothing. A short workout is better than no workout. A slightly better meal is better than a perfect meal you can't sustain. This flexibility allows them to keep going, even when things aren't ideal. Now let's talk about time, because this is where expectations often break people. Most people underestimate how long real change takes. They expect significant results in a few weeks. And when that doesn't happen, they assume something is wrong. But sustainable weight loss is a slow process. The National Institutes of Health suggests that a gradual, steady rate of weight loss is more sustainable and healthier than rapid changes. This is because your body needs time to adapt, both physically and hormonally. But psychologically, slow progress can feel frustrating. This is where patience becomes a skill, not just a trait. Patience is not about waiting passively. It's about continuing to act without immediate reward, and that's difficult. Because we live in a world where everything is fast. Instant results, instant feedback, instant gratification. Weight loss doesn't follow that pattern, and that mismatch creates tension. People who succeed learn to tolerate that tension. They don't expect daily results. They focus on weekly patterns, monthly trends, and long-term consistency. They zoom out. Now here's something that ties everything together. Awareness. Before you can change anything, you have to see it clearly. You have to notice your patterns. You have to recognize your triggers. You have to understand your behaviors without immediately judging them. This is where many people struggle, because self-awareness requires honesty. It means admitting that sometimes you're not hungry, you're just bored. It means recognizing that you're avoiding discomfort, not lacking time. It means seeing your habits as they are, not as you wish they were. But this awareness is powerful. Because once you see the pattern, you create the possibility to interrupt it. An interruption is the first step toward change. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to respond intentionally. Instead of repeating the same cycle, you start to shift it. And over time, those small shifts compound. So when you look at the original question, why do some people succeed while others always seem to give up, the answer is no longer simple, but it is clear. It's not about who wants it more. It's not about who tries harder. It's about who understands the process at a deeper level. The people who succeed are not perfect. They don't have unlimited discipline. They don't feel motivated every day. But they build systems instead of relying on feelings. They shape their environment instead of fighting it. They respond to failure with adjustment, not abandonment. They focus on process instead of obsessing over outcomes. And most importantly, they gradually become someone who can sustain the behavior. That's the real transformation. Not just a change in weight, but a change in identity. And once that identity shifts, everything else becomes easier to maintain. Because at that point, you're no longer trying to lose weight. You're simply living as someone who does. If this perspective helped you see things differently, take a second to reflect on your own patterns. And if you want more content like this, where we break down the psychology behind real-life struggles in a practical way, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. That way you don't miss the next video.